Chapter 12 of Father Goriot by Honore de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 12. Several days went by, and Rastignac lived in a whirl of gaiety. He dined almost every day with Madame de Nucingen, and went wherever she went, only returning to the Rue Neuve Sainte Genevieve in the small hours. He rose at midday, and dressed to go into the Bois with Delphine if the day was fine, squandering in this way time that was worth far more than he knew. He turned as eagerly to learn the lessons of luxury, and was as quick to feel its fascination, as the flowers of the date palm to receive the fertilizing pollen. He played high, lost and won large sums of money, and at last became accustomed to the extravagant life that young men lead in Paris. He sent 1,500 francs out of his first winnings to his mother and sisters, sending handsome presents as well as the money. He had given out that he meant to leave the Maison Vauquer, but January came and went, and he was still there, still unprepared to go. One rule holds good of most young men, whether rich or poor: they never have money for the necessaries of life, but they have always money to spare for their caprices, an anomaly which finds its explanation in their youth, and in the almost frantic eagerness with which youth grasps at pleasure. They are reckless with anything obtained on credit, while everything for which they must pay in ready money is made to last as long as possible. If they cannot have all that they want, they make up for it, it would seem, by squandering what they have. To state the matter simply, a student is far more careful of his hat than of his coat, because the latter being a comparatively costly article of dress, it is in the nature of things that a tailor should be a creditor. But it is otherwise with the hatter. The sums of money spent with him are so modest that he is the most independent and unmanageable of his tribe, and it is almost impossible to bring him to terms. The young man in the balcony of a theatre who displays a gorgeous waistcoat for the benefit of the fair owners of opera glasses has very probably no socks in his wardrobe, for the hosier is another of the genus of weevils that nibble at the purse. This was Rastignac's condition. His purse was always empty for Madame Vauquer, always full at the demand of vanity. There was a periodical ebb and flow in his fortunes, which was seldom favorable to the payment of just debts. If he was to leave that unsavory and mean abode, where from time to time his pretensions met with humiliation, the first step was to pay his hostess for a month's board and lodging, and the second to purchase furniture worthy of the new lodgings he must take in his quality of dandy, a course that remained impossible. Rastignac, out of his winnings at cards, would pay his jeweler exorbitant prices for gold watches and chains, and then, to meet the exigencies of play, would carry them to the pawnbroker, that discreet and forbidding-looking friend of youth. But when it was a question of paying for board or lodging, or for the necessary implements for the cultivation of his Elysian fields, his imagination and pluck alike deserted him. There was no inspiration to be found in vulgar necessity, in debts contracted for past requirements. Like most of those who trust to their luck, he put off till the last moment the payment of debts that among the bourgeoisie are regarded as sacred engagements, acting on the plan of Mirabeau, who never settled his baker's bill until it underwent a formidable transformation into a bill of exchange. It was about this time, when Rastignac was down on his luck and fell into debt, that it became clear to the law student's mind that he must have some more certain source of income if he meant to live as he had been doing. But while he groaned over the thorny problems of his precarious situation, he felt that he could not bring himself to renounce the pleasures of this extravagant life, and decided that he must continue it at all costs. His dreams of obtaining a fortune appeared more and more chimerical, and the real obstacles grew more formidable. His initiation into the secrets of the Nucingen household had revealed to him that if he were to attempt to use this love affair as a means of mending his fortunes, he must swallow down all sense of decency and renounce all the generous ideas which redeem the sins of youth. He had chosen this life of apparent splendor, but secretly gnawed by the cankerworm of remorse, a life of fleeting pleasure dearly paid for by persistent pain. Like Le Distrait of La Bruyere, he had descended so far as to make his bed in a ditch. But, also like Le Distrait, he himself was uncontaminated, as yet, by the mire that stained his garments. "So we have killed our mandarin, have we?" said Bianchon one day as they left the dinner table. "Not yet," he answered, "but he is at his last gasp." The medical student took this for a joke, but it was not a jest. Eugene had dined in the house that night for the first time in a long while, and had looked thoughtful during the meal. He had taken his place beside Mademoiselle Taillefer, and stayed through the dessert, giving his neighbor an expressive glance from time to time. A few of the boarders discussed the walnuts at the table, and others walked about the room, still taking part in the conversation which had begun among them. People usually went when they chose, the amount of time that they lingered being determined by the amount of interest that the conversation possessed for them, or by the difficulty of the process of digestion. In winter time the room was seldom empty before 8 o'clock, when the four women had it all to themselves, and made up for the silence previously imposed upon them by the preponderating masculine element. This evening Vautrin had noticed Eugene's abstractedness, and stayed in the room, though he had seemed to be in a hurry to finish his dinner and go. All through the talk afterwards he had kept out of the sight of the law student, who quite believed that Vautrin had left the room. He now took up his position cunningly in the sitting room, instead of going when the last boarders went. He had fathomed the young man's thoughts, and felt that a crisis was at hand. Rastignac was, in fact, in a dilemma, which many another young man must have known. Madame de Nucingen might love him, or might merely be playing with him, but in either case Rastignac had been made to experience all the alternations of hope and despair of genuine passion, and all the diplomatic arts of a Parisienne had been employed on him. After compromising herself by continually appearing in public with Madame de Beauseant's cousin, she still hesitated, and would not give him the lover's privileges which he appeared to enjoy. For a whole month she had so wrought on his senses that at last she had made an impression on his heart. If in the earliest days the student had fancied himself to be master, Madame de Nucingen had since become the stronger of the two, for she had skilfully roused and played upon every instinct, good or bad, in the 2 or 3 men comprised in a young student in Paris. This was not the result of deep design on her part, nor was she playing a part. For women are in a manner true to themselves even through their grossest deceit, because their actions are prompted by a natural impulse. It may have been that Delphine, who had allowed this young man to gain such an ascendancy over her, conscious that she had been too demonstrative, was obeying a sentiment of dignity, and either repented of her concessions, or it pleased her to suspend them. It is so natural to a Parisienne, even when passion has almost mastered her, to hesitate and pause before taking the plunge, to probe the heart of him to whom she entrusts her future. And once already Madame de Nucingen's hopes had been betrayed, and her loyalty to a selfish young lover had been despised. She had good reason to be suspicious. Or it may have been that something in Eugene's manner, for his rapid success was making a coxcomb of him, had warned her that the grotesque nature of their position had lowered her somewhat in his eyes. She doubtless wished to assert her dignity. He was young, and she would be great in his eyes, for the lover who had forsaken her had held her so cheap that she was determined that Eugene should not think her an easy conquest, and for this very reason he knew that de Marsay had been his predecessor. Finally, after the degradation of submission to the pleasure of a heartless young rake, it was so sweet to her to wander in the flower-strewn realms of love that it was not wonderful that she should wish to dwell awhile on the prospect, to tremble with the vibrations of love, to feel the freshness of the breath of its dawn. The true lover was suffering for the sins of the false. This inconsistency is unfortunately only to be expected so long as men do not know how many flowers are mown down in a young woman's soul by the first stroke of treachery. Whatever her reasons may have been, Delphine was playing with Rastignac, and took pleasure in playing with him, doubtless because she felt sure of his love, and confident that she could put an end to the torture as soon as it was her royal pleasure to do so. Eugene's self-love was engaged. He could not suffer his first passage of love to end in a defeat, and persisted in his suit, like a sportsman determined to bring down at least one partridge to celebrate his first feast of Saint Hubert. The pressure of anxiety, his wounded self-love, his despair, real or feigned, drew him nearer and nearer to this woman. All Paris credited him with this conquest, and yet he was conscious that he had made no progress since the day when he saw Madame de Nucingen for the first time. He did not know, as yet, that a woman's coquetry is sometimes more delightful than the pleasure of secure possession of her love, and was possessed with helpless rage. If at this time, while she denied herself to love, Eugene gathered the springtide spoils of his life, the fruit, somewhat sharp and green and dearly bought, was no less delicious to the taste. There were moments when he had not a sou in his pockets, and at such times he thought, in spite of his conscience, of Vautrin's offer and the possibility of fortune by a marriage with Mademoiselle Taillefer. Poverty would clamour so loudly that more than once he was on the point of yielding to the cunning temptations of the terrible Sphinx, whose glance had so often exerted a strange spell over him. Poiret and Mademoiselle Michonneau went up to their rooms, and Rastignac, thinking that he was alone with the women in the dining-room, sat between Madame Vauquer and Madame Couture, who was nodding over the woollen cuffs that she was knitting by the stove, and looked at Mademoiselle Taillefer so tenderly that she lowered her eyes. "Can you be in trouble, Monsieur Eugene?" Victorine said after a pause. "Who has not his troubles?" answered Rastignac. "If we men were sure of being loved, sure of a devotion which would be our reward for the sacrifices which we are always ready to make, then perhaps we should have no troubles." For answer, Mademoiselle Taillefer only gave him a glance, but it was impossible to mistake its meaning. "You, for instance, mademoiselle, you feel sure of your heart to-day, but are you sure that it will never change?" A smile flitted over the poor girl's lips. It seemed as if a ray of light from her soul had lighted up her face. Eugene was dismayed at the sudden explosion of feeling caused by his words. "Ah, but suppose," he said, "that you should be rich and happy to-morrow. Suppose that a vast fortune dropped down from the clouds for you. Would you still love the man whom you loved in your days of poverty?" A charming movement of the head was her only answer. "Even if he were very poor?" Again the same mute answer. "What nonsense are you talking, you two?" exclaimed Madame Vauquer. "Never mind," answered Eugene. "We understand each other." "So there is to be an engagement of marriage between Monsieur le Chevalier Eugène de Rastignac and Mademoiselle Victorine Taillefer, is there?" The words were uttered in Vautrin's deep voice, and Vautrin appeared at the door as he spoke. "Oh, how you startled me!" Madame Couture and Madame Vauquer exclaimed together. "I might make a worse choice," said Rastignac, laughing. Vautrin's voice had thrown him into the most painful agitation that he had yet known. "No bad jokes, gentlemen," said Mme. Couture. "My dear, let us go upstairs." Mme. Vauquer followed the two ladies, meaning to pass the evening in their room, an arrangement that economized fire and candlelight. Eugene and Vautrin were left alone. "I felt sure you would come round to it," said the elder man with the coolness that nothing seemed to shake. "But stay a moment, I have as much delicacy as anybody else. Don't make up your mind on the spur of the moment. You are a little thrown off your balance just now. You are in debt, and I want you to come over to my way of thinking after sober reflection, and not in a fit of passion or desperation. Perhaps you want 1,000 crowns. There, you can have them if you like." The tempter took out a pocket-book, and drew thence 3 banknotes, which he fluttered before the student's eyes. Eugene was in a most painful dilemma. He had debts, debts of honor. He owed 100 louis to the Marquis d'Ajuda and to the Count de Trailles. He had not the money, and for this reason had not dared to go to Madame de Restaud's house, where he was expected that evening. It was one of those informal gatherings where tea and little cakes are handed round, but where it is possible to lose 6,000 francs at whist in the course of a night. "You must see," said Eugene, struggling to hide a convulsive tremor, "that after what has passed between us, I cannot possibly lay myself under any obligation to you." "Quite right. I should be sorry to hear you speak otherwise," answered the tempter. "You are a fine young fellow, honorable, brave as a lion, and as gentle as a young girl. You would be a fine haul for the devil. I like youngsters of your sort. Get rid of 1 or 2 more prejudices, and you will see the world as it is. Make a little scene now and then, and act a virtuous part in it, and a man with a head on his shoulders can do exactly as he likes amid deafening applause from the fools in the gallery. Ah, a few days yet, and you will be with us. And if you would only be tutored by me, I would put you in the way of achieving all your ambitions. You should no sooner form a wish than it should be realized to the full. You should have all your desires, honors, wealth, or women. Civilization should flow with milk and honey for you. You should be our pet and favorite, our Benjamin. We would all work ourselves to death for you with pleasure. Every obstacle should be removed from your path. You have a few prejudices left. So you think that I am a scoundrel, do you? Well, Monsieur de Turenne, quite as honorable a man as you take yourself to be, had some little private transactions with bandits, and did not feel that his honor was tarnished. You would rather not lie under any obligation to me, eh? You need not draw back on that account," Vautrin went on, and a smile stole over his lips. "Take these bits of paper and write across this," he added, producing a piece of stamped paper, "accepted the sum of 3,500 francs due this day 12th, and fill in the date. The rate of interest is stiff enough to silence any scruples on your part. It gives you the right to call me a Jew. You can call quits with me on the score of gratitude. I am quite willing that you should despise me to-day, because I am sure that you will have a kindlier feeling towards me later on. You will find out fathomless depths in my nature, enormous and concentrated forces that weaklings call vices, but you will never find me base or ungrateful. In short, I am neither a pawn nor a bishop, but a castle. A tower of strength, my boy." "What manner of man are you?" cried Eugene. "Were you created to torment me?" "Why, no. I am a good-natured fellow who is willing to do a dirty piece of work to put you high and dry above the mire for the rest of your days. Do you ask the reason of this devotion? All right, I will tell you that some of these days. A word or two in your ear will explain it. I have begun by shocking you, by showing you the way to ring the changes and giving you a sight of the mechanism of the social machine. But your first fright will go off like a conscript's terror on the battlefield. You will grow used to regarding men as common soldiers who have made up their minds to lose their lives for some self-constituted king. Times have altered strangely. Once you could say to a bravo, "Here are 100 crowns. Go and kill Monsieur So-and-so for me," and you could sup quietly after turning someone off into the dark for the least thing in the world. But nowadays I propose to put you in the way of a handsome fortune. You have only to nod your head, it won't compromise you in any way, and you hesitate. 'Tis an effeminate age. Eugène accepted the draft and received the banknotes in exchange for it. "Well, well, come now, let us talk rationally," Vautrin continued. "I mean to leave this country in a few months' time for America, and set about planting tobacco. I will send you the cigars of friendship. If I make money at it, I will help you in your career. If I have no children, which will probably be the case, for I have no anxiety to raise slips of myself here, you shall inherit my fortune. That is what you may call standing by a man. But I myself have a liking for you. I have a mania, too, for devoting myself to some one else. I have done it before. You see, my boy, I live in a loftier sphere than other men do. I look on all actions as means to an end, and the end is all that I look at. What is a man's life to me? Not that," he said, and he snapped his thumbnail against his teeth. "A man, in short, is everything to me, or just nothing at all. Less than nothing, if his name happens to be Poiret. You can crush him like a bug, he is flat and he is offensive. But a man is a god when he is like you. He is not a machine covered with a skin, but a theatre in which the greatest sentiments are displayed, great thoughts and feelings. And for these, and these only, I live. A sentiment, what is that but the whole world in a thought? Look at Father Goriot. For him, his 2 girls are the whole universe. They are the clue by which he finds his way through creation. Well, for my own part, I have fathomed the depths of life. There is only one real sentiment: comradeship between man and man. Pierre and Jaffier, that is my passion. I knew Venice Preserved by heart. Have you met many men plucky enough, when a comrade says, 'Let us bury a dead body,' to go and do it without a word, or plaguing him by taking a high moral tone? I have done it myself. I should not talk like this to just everybody, but you are not like an ordinary man. One can talk to you. You can understand things. You will not dabble about much longer among the tadpoles in these swamps. Well, then, it is all settled. You will marry. Both of us carry our point. Mine is made of iron, and will never soften." Vautrin went out. He would not wait to hear the student's repudiation; he wished to put Eugène at his ease. He seemed to understand the secret springs of the faint resistance still made by the younger man, the struggles in which men seek to preserve their self-respect by justifying their blameworthy actions to themselves. "He may do as he likes. I shall not marry Mademoiselle Taillefer, that is certain," said Eugène to himself. He regarded this man with abhorrence. And yet the very cynicism of Vautrin's ideas, and the audacious way in which he used other men for his own ends, raised him in the student's eyes. But the thought of a compact threw Eugène into a fever of apprehension, and not until he had recovered somewhat did he dress, call for a cab, and go to Madame de Restaud's. For some days the Countess had paid more and more attention to a young man whose every step seemed a triumphal progress in the great world. It seemed to her that he might be a formidable power before long. He paid Messieurs de Trailles and d'Ajuda, played at whist for part of the evening, and made good his losses. Most men who have their way to make are more or less of fatalists, and Eugène was superstitious. He chose to consider that his luck was Heaven's reward for his perseverance in the right way. As soon as possible on the following morning, he asked Vautrin whether the bill he had given was still in the other's possession, and on receiving a reply in the affirmative, he repaid the 3,000 francs with a not unnatural relief. "Everything is going on well," said Vautrin. "But I am not your accomplice," said Eugene. I know," Vautrin broke in. "You are still acting like a child. You are making mountains out of molehills at the outset." 2 days later, Poiret and Mademoiselle Michonneau were sitting together on a bench in the sun. They had chosen a little frequented alley in the Jardin des Plantes, and a gentleman was chatting with them, the same person, as a matter of fact, about whom the medical student had, not without good reason, his own suspicions. "Mademoiselle," this Monsieur Gondureau was saying, "I do not see any cause for your scruples. His Excellency, Monseigneur the Minister of Police—" "Ah!" echoed Poiret, "His Excellency Monseigneur the Minister of Police." "Yes, His Excellency is taking a personal interest in the matter," said Gondureau. Who would think it probable that Poiret, a retired clerk, doubtless possessed of some notions of civic virtue, though there might be nothing else in his head, who would think it likely that such a man would continue to lend an ear to the supposed independent gentleman of the Rue de Buffon, when the latter dropped the mask of a decent citizen by that word police, and gave a glimpse of the features of a detective from the Rue de Jerusalem? And yet nothing was more natural. Perhaps the following remarks from the hitherto unpublished records made by certain observers will throw a light on the particular species to which Poiret belonged in the great family of fools. There is a race of quill drivers confined in the columns of the budget between the first degree of latitude, a kind of administrative Greenland where the salaries begin at 1,200 francs, to the third degree, a more temperate zone where incomes grow from 3,000 to 6,000 francs, a climate where the bonus flourishes like a half-hardy annual in spite of some difficulties of culture. A characteristic trait that best reveals the feeble narrow-mindedness of these inhabitants of petty officialdom is a kind of involuntary, mechanical, and instinctive reverence for the Grand Lama of every ministry, known to the rank and file only by his signature, an illegible scrawl, and by his title, His Excellency Monseigneur le Ministre. 5 words which produce as much effect as the Il Bondo Cani of the Caliph de Bagdad. 5 words which in the eyes of this low order of intelligence represent a sacred power from which there is no appeal. The minister is administratively infallible for the clerks in the employ of the government, as the Pope is infallible for good Catholics. Something of this peculiar radiance invests everything he does or says, or that is said or done in his name. The robe of office covers everything and legalizes everything done by his orders. Does not his very title, His Excellency, vouch for the purity of his intentions and the righteousness of his will, and serve as a sort of passport and introduction to ideas that otherwise would not be entertained for a moment? Pronounce the words His Excellency, and these poor folk will forthwith proceed to do what they would not do for their own interests. Passive obedience is as well known in a government department as in the army itself, and the administrative system silences consciences, annihilates the individual, and ends, give it time enough, by fashioning a man into a vice or a thumbscrew, and he becomes part of the machinery of government. Wherefore Monsieur Gondureau, who seemed to know something of human nature, recognized Poiret at once as one of those dupes of officialdom, and brought out for his benefit, at the proper moment, the Deus ex machina, the magical words His Excellency, so as to dazzle Poiret just as he himself unmasked his batteries, for he took Poiret and the Michonneau for the male and female of the same species. "If His Excellency himself, His Excellency the Minister, that is quite another thing," said Poiret. "You seem to be guided by this gentleman's opinion, and you hear what he says," said the man of independent means, addressing Mademoiselle Michonneau. "Very well. His Excellency is at this moment absolutely certain that the so called Vautrin, who lodges at the Maison Vauquer, is a convict who escaped from penal servitude at Toulon, where he is known by the nickname Trompe la Mort." "Trompe la Mort?" said Poiret. "Dear me, he is very lucky if he deserves that nickname." "Well, yes," said the detective. "They call him so because he has been so lucky as not to lose his life in the very risky businesses that he has carried through. He is a dangerous man, you see; he has qualities that are out of the common. The thing he is wanted for, in fact, was a matter which gained him no end of credit with his own set." "Then he is a man of honor?" asked Poiret. "Yes, according to his notions. He agreed to take another man's crime upon himself, a forgery committed by a very handsome young fellow that he had taken a great fancy to, a young Italian, a bit of a gambler, who has since gone into the army, where his conduct has been unexceptionable." "But if His Excellency the Minister of Police is certain that Monsieur Vautrin is this Trompe la Mort, why should he want me?" asked Mademoiselle Michonneau. "Oh yes," said Poiret, "if the Minister, as you have been so obliging as to tell us, really knows for a certainty." "Certainty is not the word. He only suspects. You will soon understand how things are. Jacques Collin, nicknamed Trompe la Mort, is in the confidence of every convict in the three prisons. He is their man of business and their banker. He makes a very good thing out of managing their affairs, which want a man of mark to see about them." "Ha, ha! Do you see the pun, mademoiselle?" asked Poiret. "This gentleman calls himself a man of mark because he is a marked man, branded, you know." "This so called Vautrin," said the detective, "receives the money belonging to my lords the convicts, invests it for them, and holds it at the disposal of those who escape, or hands it over to their families if they leave a will, or to their mistresses when they draw upon him for their benefit." "Their mistresses? You mean their wives?" remarked Poiret. "No, sir. A convict's wife is usually an illegitimate connection. We call them concubines." "Then they all live in a state of concubinage?" "Naturally." "Why, these are abominations that His Excellency ought not to allow. Since you have the honor of seeing His Excellency, you, who seem to have philanthropic ideas, ought really to enlighten him as to their immoral conduct. They are setting a shocking example to the rest of society." "But the Government does not hold them up as models of all the virtues, my dear sir." "Of course not, sir, but still—" "Just let the gentleman say what he has to say, dearie," said Mademoiselle Michonneau. "You see how it is, mademoiselle," Gongerot continued. "The Government may have the strongest reasons for getting this illicit hoard into its hands; it mounts up to something considerable by all that we can make out. Trompe la Mort not only holds large sums for his friends the convicts, but he has other amounts which are paid over to him by the Society of the 10,000. "10,000 thieves!" cried Poiret in alarm. "No, the Society of the 10,000 is not an association of petty offenders, but of people who set about their work on a large scale; they won't touch a matter unless there are 10,000 francs in it. It is composed of the most distinguished of the men who are sent straight to the assize courts when they come up for trial. They know the code too well to risk their necks when they are nabbed. Collin is their confidential agent and legal adviser. By means of the large sums of money at his disposal, he has established a sort of detective system of his own. It is widespread and mysterious in its workings. We have had spies all about him for a twelvemonth, and yet we could not manage to fathom his games. His capital and his cleverness are at the service of vice and crime. This money furnishes the necessary funds for a regular army of blackguards in his pay, who wage incessant war against society. If we can catch Trompe la Mort and take possession of his funds, we should strike at the root of this evil. So this job is a kind of government affair, a state secret, and likely to redound to the honor of those who bring the thing to a successful conclusion. You, sir, for instance, might very well be taken into a government department again; they might make you secretary to a commissary of police. You could accept that post without prejudice to your retiring pension." Mademoiselle Michonneau interposed at this point with: "What is there to hinder Trompe la Mort from making off with the money?" "Oh," said the detective, "a man is told off to follow him everywhere he goes, with orders to kill him if he were to rob the convicts. Then it is not quite as easy to make off with a lot of money as it is to run away with a young lady of family. Besides, Collin is not the sort of fellow to play such a trick. He would be disgraced, according to his notions." "You are quite right, sir," said Poiret. "Utterly disgraced he would be." "But none of all this explains why you do not come and take him without more ado," remarked Mademoiselle Michonneau. "Very well, mademoiselle, I will explain. But," he added in her ear, "keep your companion quiet, or I shall never have done. The old boy ought to pay people handsomely for listening to him. Trompe la Mort, when he came back here," he went on aloud, "slipped into the skin of an honest man. He turned up disguised as a decent Parisian citizen, and took up his quarters in an unpretending lodging house. He is cunning, that he is; you don't catch him napping. Then Monsieur Vautrin is a man of consequence, who transacts a good deal of business." "Naturally," said Poiret to himself. "And suppose that the Minister were to make a mistake, and get hold of the real Vautrin. He would put every one's back up among the business men in Paris, and public opinion would be against him. Monsieur le Prefet de Police is on slippery ground; he has enemies. They would take advantage of any mistake; there would be a fine outcry and fuss made by the Opposition, and he would be sent packing. We must set about this just as we did with the Coignard affair, the sham Comte de Sainte Helene. If he had been the real Comte de Sainte Helene, we should have been in the wrong box. We want to be quite sure what we are about." "Yes, but what you want is a pretty woman," said Mademoiselle Michonneau briskly. "Trompe la Mort would not let a woman come near him," said the detective. "I will tell you a secret. He does not like them." "Still, I do not see what I can do, supposing that I did agree to identify him for 2,000 francs." "Nothing simpler," said the stranger. "I will send you a little bottle containing a dose that will send a rush of blood to the head. It will do him no harm whatever, but he will fall down as if he were in a fit. The drug can be put into wine or coffee, either will do equally well. You carry your man to bed at once, and undress him to see that he is not dying. As soon as you are alone, you give him a slap on the shoulder, and presto! the letters will appear." "Why, that is just nothing at all," said Poiret. "Well, do you agree?" said Gondureau, addressing the old maid. "But, my dear sir, suppose there are no letters at all," said Mademoiselle Michonneau. "Am I to have the 2,000 francs all the same?" "No." "What will you give me then?" 500 francs. "It is such a thing to do for so little. It lies on your conscience just the same, and I must quiet my conscience, sir." "I assure you," said Poiret, "that mademoiselle has a great deal of conscience, and not only so, she is a very amiable person, and very intelligent." "Well, now," Mademoiselle Michonneau went on, "make it 3,000 francs if he is Trompe la Mort, and nothing at all if he is an ordinary man." "Done," said Gondureau, "but on the condition that the thing is settled to-morrow." "Not quite so soon, my dear sir. I must consult my confessor first." "You are a sly one," said the detective as he rose to his feet. "Good bye till to-morrow, then. And if you should want to see me in a hurry, go to the Petite Rue Sainte Anne at the bottom of Cour de la Sainte Chapelle. There is one door under the archway. Ask there for Monsieur Gondureau." "Bianchon!" on his way back from Cuvier's lecture, overheard the sufficiently striking nickname of Trompe la Mort, and caught the celebrated chief detective's "done." "Why didn't you close with him? It would be 300 francs a year," said Poiret to Mademoiselle Michonneau. "Why didn't I?" she asked. "Why, it wants thinking over. Suppose that Monsieur Vautrin is this Trompe la Mort, perhaps we might do better for ourselves with him. Still, on the other hand, if you ask him for money, it would put him on his guard, and he is just the man to clear out without paying, and that would be an abominable sell." "And suppose you did warn him," Poiret went on, "didn't that gentleman say that he was closely watched? You would spoil everything." "Anyhow," thought Mademoiselle Michonneau, "I can't abide him; he says nothing but disagreeable things to me." "But you can do better than that," Poiret resumed. "As that gentleman said, and he seemed to me to be a very good sort of man, besides being very well got up, it is an act of obedience to the laws to rid society of a criminal, however virtuous he may be. Once a thief, always a thief. Suppose he were to take it into his head to murder us all? The deuce! We should be guilty of manslaughter, and be the first to fall victims into the bargain." Mademoiselle Michonneau's musings did not permit her to listen very closely to the remarks that fell one by one from Poiret's lips like water dripping from a leaky tap. When once this elderly babbler began to talk, he would go on like clockwork unless Mademoiselle Michonneau stopped him. He started on some subject or other, and wandered on through parenthesis after parenthesis, till he came to regions as remote as possible from his premises, without coming to any conclusions by the way. By the time they reached the Maison Vauquer, he had tacked together a whole string of examples and quotations more or less irrelevant to the subject in hand, which led him to give a full account of his own deposition in the case of the Sieur Ragulot versus Dame Morin, when he had been summoned as a witness for the defense. As they entered the dining room, Eugène de Rastignac was talking apart with Mademoiselle Taillefer. The conversation appeared to be of such thrilling interest that the pair never noticed the two older lodgers as they passed through the room. None of this was thrown away on Mademoiselle Michonneau. "I knew how it would end," remarked that lady, addressing Poiret. "They have been making eyes at each other in a heartrending way for a week past." "Yes," he answered. "So she was found guilty." "Who?" "Madame Morin." "I am talking about Mademoiselle Victorine," said Mademoiselle Michonneau as she entered Poiret's room with an absent air. "And you answer, 'Madame Morin'? Who may Madame Morin be?" "What can Mademoiselle Victorine be guilty of?" demanded Poiret. "Guilty of falling in love with Monsieur Eugène de Rastignac, and going further and further without knowing exactly where she is going. Poor innocent!" End of chapter 12.